Greetings, everyone. This is Amul Matu from University of Maryland, and I've got a great case for you this week. This is the EKG case of the week for May 12th, 2012. I've got an interesting rhythm case for you. Here it is. It's a 48-year-old man that presented to the emergency department complaining of weakness. And so, of course, after the history of physical exam, you're going to start out with the 12-lead EKG. Now, looking at this 12-lead EKG, the ventricular rate is not too fast, and it's also not too slow, so we're relatively happy about this ventricular rate, but there's something going on in here that's a little bit hard to define. The R to R interval is changing. It looks like it's getting shorter, and then there's another one right there, and then it goes back to long and then short. Anyway, the R to R interval is messed up, to use once again a technical term. And in terms of the P waves, well, there's a P wave right there, and it looks like there's a P wave there and there and there, but there's some other things going on also. Where's the P wave for that QRS and that QRS? And, maybe we can assume that those are connected. Well, I'm not really sure. Maybe there's something in there, and maybe there's something right there also. There's little blips in there. I'm not really sure what to make of those blips. And again, blips is a very technical term that I've been using the past couple of weeks. And what I said in the past is that whenever you've got blips, and you're thinking, well, maybe those are P waves, the simple way to find out for sure whether those are P waves or not is to get some calipers and map it out. So these red arrows represent my calipers. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to map out the definite P wave with the questionable P wave, and then march this right across the EKG strip, and sure enough, what you find is that the clear-cut P waves map out with those blips. It maps out all the way across these complexes, and it also reveals to us that that little junk right there is a P wave, and also that little blip right after the QRS complex is a blip as well, and that little blip right there before that QRS complex is a blip as well. You'll also notice, if you're going to try to figure out which P waves are going with which QRS complex, well, it's not necessarily that difficult. We can probably assume that this P wave goes with that QRS complex. Let's move a little bit further. There's a P wave right in there, and that goes with that QRS complex. And there's a P wave right there which goes with that QRS complex. You'll notice that the PR intervals are getting longer, and then there's a P wave right there which is not getting conducted. There's no QRS complex following it, and then you've got another P wave which is being conducted to that QRS complex. So you've got a P wave which is not being conducted. That's the second important finding. First important finding, of course, is to first of all realize that those really are P waves. Second important finding is that there's a P wave which is not being conducted. What that means is we're dealing with a heart block, either second degree type 1, also known as Mobus 1, also known as Wenckebach, or second degree type 2, also known as Mobus 2, or third degree. So is this a Mobus 1, is it a Mobus 2, or third degree? And as we've said many times in the past, whenever you're debating between Mobus 1, Mobus 2, and third degree, where do you need to look to find the answer? You simply look in the PR intervals. And what we discovered here was that the PR intervals were gradually lengthening, and then you've got the P wave which is not conducted, And what that means, folks, is that this somewhat funky, complicated-looking rhythm is nothing more than a Mobitz 1, and there's some lateral T-wave inversions suggesting some ischemia out laterally. But anyway, focusing on the rhythm, this is a Mobitz 1, also known as Wenke Bach, or second-degree type 1 AV block. All right, so again, three simple things. Whenever you see blips on the 12-lead EKG and you're debating, are those blips, are those real P waves, or is that just artifact? You know, those are not clear-cut P waves. You just map it out with what you know for sure is a real P wave. I know that's a real P wave, and that looks like a real good P wave. So just map it out. And what you find is that sure enough, they do map out very nicely. That means that all of those are true P waves. And then what you do is you just take a look at what the PR intervals are, and when you look at what the PR interval is doing, then you'll easily be able to figure out whether it's a Mobitz 1 or a Mobitz 2 or a third-degree heart block. You just break it down, and suddenly these rhythms become very, very simple. All right? So, well, that's it for this week's Case of the Week. It's a short case, but a nice little rhythm. I hope that was helpful, and I look forward to talking to you next week. Bye for now.
My name is Daniel Duquet, the ultrasound director at Elmhurst Hospital Center. And I'm going to be demonstrating the proper technique to visualize the inferior vena cava.
All right, so what Danny's doing here is he's just taking a curvilinear 3 to 5 megahertz probe. He's aiming the indicator towards the head. He's placing it just under the xiphoid process, and then he's just sliding 1 to 2 centimeters to the patient's right. So that's the deal. Probe goes just under the xiphoid. Slide 1 to 2 centimeters to the patient's right, and just tilt towards the heart. So let's go through the normal anatomy you'll then see on your ultrasound screen. So what you see is, you see a IVC, the black thin-walled structure underneath the liver, and you're getting just a cut of the heart, the right atrium. And that's key. That's the proper position when you have just a little bit of the heart there. All right. Now you see that arrow? That's measuring 1 centimeter past the hepatic vein towards the patient's feet. That's where you want to look at the IVC. If you can't see that, then you just go about 2 to 3 centimeters from the heart border. So just to review that anatomy one more time, that thin black vascular structure is the IVC, liver's on top of it, and you're getting just a tiny cut of the heart. About 1 centimeter past the hepatic vein, or 2 to 3 centimeters from the heart edge, is where you look at the IVC. This IVC is collapsing nearly completely, but anything greater than 50% is a patient who's going to be responsive to fluid. So that's been the most validated number. If the IVC collapses more than 50%, give them some fluid. I would tell you if it's greater than 30%, which is really what you could easily see with your eye, I would probably, in most cases, give them fluid. So if you're really seeing any significant collapse, then the patient needs fluid. All right, we gave that patient 4 liters of fluid. Look at the IVC now. No respiratory collapse. If we look just past the hepatic vein, that IVC is not collapsing with respiration. It's staying pretty much identically sized throughout the respiration cycle. This patient doesn't need fluid. All right, another patient who has near complete or certainly greater than 50% collapse of their IVC with respiration. Patient needs fluid. All right, we gave that patient 2 liters. We take a look at the IVC again. It's bigger, but it's still collapsing greater than 50%. More fluid needed. Here's another patient that needs fluid. IVC collapsing just past that hepatic vein with respiration. All right, we gave that patient 6 liters of fluid. Look at the IVC now. No respiratory collapse, staying just about the same size. All right, just one key point to understand about all this. Fluid unresponsive does not mean fluid loaded. All right, It just means the patient is not going to increase their cardiac output with fluid. That's what the collapsing of the IVC tells you. Sometimes you'll have a patient with negative inotropy secondary to their septic state who will not be fluid responsive, and their IVC will not collapse. But then you give them some inotropy with some calcium or dobutamine, all of a sudden their heart's pumping better. If you look at their IVC again, it will start collapsing, and that patient then needs more fluid.